3, 2, 1.
Hi, and welcome to Season 2 of Empathy Tales. This is Victoria Woelders, your host, and here we are continuing to do Empathy Tales. So excited to have you here, and we have now published 5 lovely stories, and so we're going to be sharing those, which is very exciting. If you would like to buy Empathy Tales 1, the first Treasury, you can go to your Amazon website and look for the hardcover and the softcover. You can also check out woldersworld.wordpress.com. I have changed from mykidslocker.com to, again, woldersworld.wordpress.com. And you can also find me on social media. So today we are going to be sharing The Boy, the Princess, and the Paddle. Love for you to sit down, turn away the screens, and spend some time listening to this beautiful revamped story that is now published and is story 2 in the Empathy Tales 1, the first Treasury book. So without further ado, if you are comfortable, if you are ready, then I will begin. The Boy, the Prince, and the Paddle. Story told on June 10th, 2018. Life is truly a reflection of what we allow ourselves to see and be. Trudy Simonaskis Vidovsky. Once upon a time, there lived a boy in the Oak and Eagle Kingdom, in the land of the Eastern Eagle. His name was Nathaniel. When he was born, his skin was different. His patchy skin looked like hard, cracked paper. When he walked through the village, people would make fun of him, the way he looked. They did not understand him. He felt alone. He began to not go through the village, but go the long way around the village. One thing he loved to do is to go on a boat and travel on the local streams. He would look high up on the hills and see a beautiful castle far up on the hillside. In the castle there was a princess, and the princess was the same age as him. Every time he went on his little boat, he would bring a paddle to steer the boat. His grandmother gave him the paddle, and it was a special paddle. The paddle was magical, and he could treasure it. He would press the paddle into the water when the sun was high in the sky, and the water would shimmer. He would think to himself, "My grandmother is a kind woman. Her care allows me to paddle through this magical land." His grandmother had given him such a wonderful gift. One day, as he paddled, he saw a small dock. On the dock was a young girl lying on the dock with her long, beautiful blonde hair hanging. The tips of her hair touched the water. She looked at the ripples on the water. He turned his boat around so she would not see him. He loved to look into the ripples as well. He did this because when he looked at his reflection, he would not see his skin problems. He would see a wonderful reflection filled with reflected sunlight. One day, he decided to paddle up to her. He decided he would look down at the water. She only looked at the water, too. They did not make eye contact. He saw her eyes in the reflection of the water, and he talked with her there. She would not lift her head, and he would not lift his head. She did not want him to know that she was a princess. He did not want her to see the scars on his face that were so painful to him. They stared down at the water and looked at each other through the glistening stream. He saw her face, and she would see his face in the water. It was amazing that we can be out here on this beautiful summer day, he said to her. Oh, yes, I love being outside with the trees waving in the air. The birds are beautiful in the sky. The warmth of the sunlight hitting my hair and the back of my head is the most comforting feeling to me. Her hair swayed back and forth as a gentle breeze came by. As time went by, every single day they would meet. They talked about their favorite foods, animals, and memories. Every day, though, they would only look at each other through the reflections in the water. They got to know each other. Years went by, and they came to know each other well. She came to love this boy who would never lift his eyes to her. He was kind, compassionate, and caring. His voice soothed her soul in the pains of her life. He loved her. She loved him. They cared for each other. That made him feel special and important. She showed empathy when he would share stories about the way he looked and acted. She cared. He knew she cared. They started to care for each other. When they talked about birthdays, they realized they had the same birthdays. They shared their birthdays on the 1st of September. They decided on September 1st that they were going to look each other in the face. They both would be 25. They planned to celebrate who they were despite where they came from and their faces. On September 1st, he came wearing his best shirt, and he paddled up to the dock. He was shy. She walked to the dock and dropped her long hair down where the water was. They both went to raise their faces, and they met each other with pure, caring eyes that were empathetic and kind. He realized that he had been talking to a princess all along. He felt embarrassed. The princess said to him, "I love looking at the reflections because it makes me think that I am a typical person." "I like looking into the reflections because it makes me think that I am a typical person too," he replied. They agreed, despite their past and their conditions, that both were special. The princess shared that she was to marry a prince from a distant land. Nathaniel shared how he loved her, and she replied that she loved him too. She said, "You are the one I want to be with forever." He replied, "But I am a commoner. You need to meet my father, and I want you to bring the paddle that your grandmother gave you." That day came when he was to meet the king. They walked holding each other's hands into the castle. As they walked into this amazing throne room, he saw her father sitting on the throne. His eyes were down, looking at a manuscript. "Yes, daughter, what would you like?" "I'm busy right now," he said. The king looked up again and continued, "But it looks like you found a new servant to help us at our castle. Father, this is the man I will marry." Nathaniel's head was down and his clothes were not of royal stature. She said, "Take the paddle and show my father your heritage." Nathaniel, lift it over your head so my father can see what an amazing heritage you have. As he lifted his head and the paddle at the same time, magical transformation came. His clothes transformed into elegant garments and his face cleansed of his scars. The paddle was a magical paddle. The paddle had changed him to look like his heart looks. He looked majestic and showed his loving heart. The king raised his eyes to see a wonderful transformation. "What happened?" "I don't know. Your transformation is what your heart shows and reveals. My grandmother gave me this magical paddle," replied Nathaniel. The king embraced Nathaniel and said, "Marry my daughter. My eyes see the kind, caring person you are. Please accept my apology for my judgment. We accept you for who you are." Nathaniel lowered the paddle from above his head. His skin became marked and scarred again. The king paused and believed that the paddle allowed him to see his true heart. Nathaniel will never have this transformation again, yet in that moment it happened. The king agreed for Nathaniel and the princess to wed. Nathaniel and the princess wed. At the wedding, they held up the paddle as a sign of blessing. In their throne room, they chose to hang up the magic paddle. They would display it for the beauty, honor, and kindness it represented. On most days, the new princess and prince would go down to that very dock they met at. They would spend time looking at their reflections. They knew through those reflections they found their true self and their true love. They learned the lesson of unconditional love in their reflections. Well, I hope that you enjoyed today's story, The Boy, the Princess, and the Paddle. You can always look and listen for the original recording back in the early episodes of the Empathy Tales podcast. If you have any questions for me, feel free to reach out to me, Victoria Woelders, on any social media outlets. And you can also find me on Amazon with the Empathy Tales 1, the first Treasury book, but also at woeldersworld.wordpress.com. Well, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I hope you create compassion one story at a time. Thank you for joining us today.